Hello, how's it going?
Yeah, I am doing pretty well. I just finished the training for my new mental health coaching job that I'm doing through Lyra Clinical, and I
Yeah.
am so excited. I have to do they call it a dress rehearsal, but it's really my test session to make sure I'm not a crazy person, and then I get to actually start seeing clients.
Wait. You're assuming the test is going to come out showing you're not a crazy person.
I am assuming that I can hide it for 45 minutes.
Okay, now that is a true statement.
Yes, exactly. But how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. It is track season in my house, and my youngest son competes in shot put and discus. And so he has track meets all the time, which means two things. One, I get to knock off work early and go see him. And two, it has actually been one of the nicest springs I can remember in Oregon. And so it means a lot of time out in the sunshine and sitting around at ballparks and track fields and whatnot. Like, it's been a really nice spring. And I'm just realizing how much I enjoy being out sitting in the early spring sun. It's great.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Oh, and he's doing
You
well also.
Good. I'm thrilled he's doing well.
Yeah. Priorities.
But I'm also thrilled that you get to sit out in the sun and just relax and have kind of that sort of participant sit and watch family time community situation happening.
Yeah, that's the official term.
There were a few hyphens in there.
Yes, indeed. But yeah, so I understand you have a follow-up thought for today's episode.
Yes. Last week we were talking about Richard Lovelace's book, Dynamics of Spiritual Life, and particularly the fact that he talks through what he calls the secondary elements of renewal. The primary elements of renewal are really things you need to believe. They're elements of the gospel that you need to really hold on to experience renewal in your life and in your church. And they're things like justification and sanctification and the indwelling of the Spirit and authority and spiritual conflict. And he digs into all those things. And then he has secondary elements of renewal that are the outworking of the gospel in the church's life. And we talked about, oddly enough, we started with number 4 last week because the first 3, I think, kind of intuitively make sense to us. Mission, prayer, community. Then last week we dug into disenculturation, and I thought that was a fascinating conversation, but it felt to me like half the conversation because disenculturation really is talking about what you need to kind of almost disassemble or take apart. And his 5th secondary element of renewal is theological integration, which feels to me like the second half of disenculturation, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I want to have that conversation. Can we talk about theological integration as an outworking of the gospel in the church's life?
Boy, I mean, I'm going to accuse you twice in one breath of that's a lot of words. Theological integration as the outworking of the gospel in the church's life. Wow.
Yeah, right. It is a giant chunk.
I mean, I hear that and I try to think through what it means. And isn't this what the church has historically called discipleship? Like, just to boil it down to one word. Isn't that what we mean when we talk about discipleship, is theological integration as an outwork of the gospel in the church?
You know, on some level, I think that you aren't wrong.
Wait, is it so painful to tell me I'm right that you have to use a double negative?
Well, first of all, I am in the vein of using lots of words today. So you're going to just
Okay.
have to live with it.
Okay.
And I'm wrestling with, as you ask me that, is there any piece of what I think okay, here's my question. I think discipleship has often meant do the right thing or think the right thing.
Hmm.
And I'm not sure it has meant fully integrate doing the right thing and thinking the right thing. And that's what I think this pulls me towards, this idea of theological integration. Also, if you were to go and look up books that are designed to disciple you, if there are 500 books, very few of them reference the church as the essential context of discipleship. A lot of them, particularly in our Western American individualist context, are here's what you need to do with Jesus in order to fully follow him.
Hmm. Yeah. So yeah, discipleship is very much like a one-on-one or a me and
Yeah.
Jesus, let me get my act together. Let me learn to, as you said before, either do the right thing or think the right thing.
Yeah. So, those are my two big hesitations in saying, yes, it's what we mean by discipleship. Because I think those two pieces of integrating thought and action and deeply depending on the church as context are often missing. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Well, okay. So what I would love to do then, I'd love to just take a moment and tease out our own experience with discipleship programs in the church and contrast that later with what this author means by theological integration. How is that different than what we've experienced through discipleship programs before? Because I got to admit, I've never been at a church and been like, oh, come to our theological integration night on Tuesday. So like this is not a term I think churches use. And so whether or not they hit the mark of what this author is suggesting, I think discipleship is what is in its place.
I totally agree. I think you're absolutely right. I think that this is we do this, I think, in church fairly regularly. When we are not pleased with a practice of the church, we come up with a new word for it in hopes of infusing it with new life.
Yeah.
And so, or in hopes of course correcting. So, yeah. So I'm curious, in your experience, what has discipleship looked like in the local church for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, discipleship has taken a couple of different forms. I've grown up in the post Willow Creek era, and hence small groups is a part of discipleship. And in a couple of different contexts, it seems to be the main aspect of discipleship. It's just assumed that if you're in a small group, you will grow. And often there isn't a lot of parameters around small groups and what goes on in those groups and who's qualified to lead a small group. But I think a lot of those details get left by the wayside. And so it's just assumed, oh, you do small groups in order to grow and be discipled. I was also part of a church that was more intellectually based. The pastor was head of the doctorate of ministry program at a local seminary. And so he was just a little bit more intellectual. And there were a lot of people in the church as a result that leaned that direction. And so they had not really an in-house seminary. That would be way overstating it. But in-house classes where you could learn some theological things, like you could get some theological education right there in the church. And so that would fall squarely in your category earlier of think the right things. And I on a macro scale, The Sunday school movement, I think, is part of discipleship. And though adult Sunday school has gone by the wayside in most churches across the country, we still have children's church. We still have discipleship programs for our kids. So I think those are the main ways that I've experienced discipleship in the church. But I also know you were a pastor for 20 years, and in many of those years, you were responsible for portions of the discipleship program.
Yeah, and we had done a lot of these things, small groups, classes. Our small groups, particularly at the church I was at in Boston, ranged from very controlled on the one hand. At one point, I would teach for 45 minutes, and then we would break into small groups that led a discussion based on my teaching. And I was meeting with those small group leaders approximately every other week so that I knew what was going on in the group. So it was a very controlled, I know what the topic is, I know what the discussion's about, I know what's going on, all the way to on the flip side. At one point, we basically said, if you want to be a small group leader, tell us what you want to do and we're going to let you do it. And it could be it can be a running group, it can be a cooking group, it can be a Bible group, it can be, we basically split them, I think, into three categories. It was like community groups, theology groups, and then some other, I don't remember what the other one was. But so we did all those kinds of things
So
and
I,
offered, yeah.
I know you've got some other ideas about discipleship that you did, but I'm really curious about that last one. When it comes to discipleship, what was the thought there about like running groups and basketball groups and whatever else? Like, what was it? Was discipleship part of your goal, or did you have a different goal?
No, it really was. I think it was discipleship, but recognizing different people are at different places. And I think what we were really trying to emphasize was rubbing shoulders with other people who are following Jesus is the first step to spiritual growth.
Hmm.
And so if we can just open up a space for you to actually connect with other people who are trying to go in the same direction that you're trying to go, uh, and this goes way back to my own college experience. A year and a half into college, I was spending most of my hanging out time like with people who were not particularly interested in following Jesus. They were kind of coasting spiritually.
Hmm.
And there came a moment where I realized I wanted to take following Jesus more seriously. And as I sort of looked at my own life, I realized that just means I need to spend time with people who are doing that. And so I changed my friend group very proactively. And in doing so, changed the spiritual culture of my life.
Hmm.
And I ended up in actually a small group that was being led by my like lifelong friend Val, who I later worked for in Boston, and she's amazing. And I have friends. I mean, that group became for me the catalyst to a level of spiritual life that I couldn't have had on my own. And so, on some level, I think what we decided was it doesn't matter if what the group is about, if we can get people who want to live together towards Jesus in the same space.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that experiment started as I was transitioning, as COVID was happening, and then as I transitioned out of that church. So I would love to hear from them if they feel like that's working. Because I
Hmm.
have no idea. It sounds
Yeah.
good. Um, but I'll tell you what we decided did work. We were in a church staff retreat maybe 8, 10 years ago. And we did this every year. We would go away for 2 or 3 days. and ask ourselves kind of some basic questions that all amount to what's working and what's not working. And one year, discipleship was the primary question: what's working and what's not working? So we listed out the top 10 people that we could think of who were genuinely showing that they were growing in a very real and powerful way, and started asking, what are the common denominators here? And the one common denominator is actually none of the things we've listed so far.
Oh, really?
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
The common denominator was a personal relationship with a staff member.
Really?
Yeah. Because staff members were committed to discipling people one-on-one on a very different level. It wasn't just, hey, we're going to hang out. It was, we're going to have serious conversations that challenge you to grow. Even our lay volunteers didn't always, kind of shied away from those conversations sometimes.
Oh, sure. Which makes total sense. I'm wondering the extent to which it was just confirmation bias. Like, this is who you knew. You were tracking their stories because you're with them. So these are the people you knew about. Is there a chance that there were other people that were growing in other circles and you just didn't know about it?
It is certainly possible. However, I will say that particular church context, we are actively in everybody's story.
Yeah.
There aren't people that we don't like. That particular church takes the shepherding role really seriously and knows what's going on in parishioners' stories all the time. And so there is constant conversation about who's doing what and what's going on in order to make sure that we are shepherding. We were shepherding effectively and caring for people well. And so in a more traditional church context, it's certainly possible. And certainly, I'm not saying it's not possible. Of course, it's possible that there are people I didn't know about that were growing. However,
I hear you
it
saying
wasn't
it's
because of
less
what was
likely.
going on in the church, that's for sure.
Yeah, right. Well, so what's the transferable principle, you think? Like, do you think it is genuinely everybody needs to create a personal relationship with somebody that's on staff at their church? Or is there something more broad than that?
I would at least say we need to bring up mentoring. Real, serious mentoring beyond friendship. Here's the example that always comes to mind for me. This was years and years ago. First small group I was ever in that church in Boston, where I wasn't the pastor, I wasn't the small group leader. I just started joining the church. And a woman in the church, in the small group, got engaged to this guy who had absolutely no interest in following Jesus. And everybody in the small group congratulated her and celebrated, and nobody said, hey, this isn't good for your spiritual life. Nobody was thinking about her life from that lens and willing to do something about it. And I think that's the two things that, to me, mentoring is about. I'm going to look at your life from a spiritual lens, and I'm willing to have a hard conversation with you about that because that's what I care about. And friends are seeing you from a different angle than that. And friends are interested in preserving the relationship no matter what. And that sometimes determines which conversations get had.
Yeah.
So not mentoring, if I define it that way, I think, with those two lenses in mind.
Those two lenses being willing to have the hard conversations and looking at your life through a spiritual lens.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's tough. You know what I would love? We had a conversation a number of weeks ago now about the stages of spiritual development. And or the stages of faith, I think is what we called the episode. And I would love for it to be routine, if you will, for people to think about their spiritual development in terms of those stages and be able to say, okay, I'm at a stage 2, and it is okay to be at a stage 2, but that means I need at least a stage 3 or higher to mentor me. Who's at a stage 3 or higher? And I wish people in the church looked at each other through that lens, which is far different than, oh, you're a successful businessman. You must be at a stage 6, right? Maybe.
And I'm actually going to steal a piece. I think the way that this becomes integrated actually into a church culture, potentially, you have been in one context that gave language that I will use for the rest of my life about how I think this should be done. When you were in seminary, you told me that in theory, and I don't know if you feel like this was accomplished or not, but in theory, they were trying to set you up to have what you called a balcony mentor. Do you remember this?
Oh, 100% I do. Yes.
So it's your story. You tell what was happening there and what they were going for.
So Denver Seminary, if anybody's out there is considering a seminary, Denver Seminary has an amazing online program. You can do it from anywhere in the world. They've been doing it long before COVID. They know what they're doing. They've got it dialed in, and it's a quality education, even online. And I didn't think I would love that. I'm a verbal processor kind of guy. I love being in the classroom, but I loved my time at Denver Seminary despite being online. One of the things that they do, whether you're residential or online, is they have this mentoring program. Again, they've been doing this for decades. They know what they're doing. So they have kind of a mentoring 101 class that you have to take. And then every mentoring semester after that, you are working with your, what they call balcony mentor. This is somebody who just walks through seminary with you. They're just your trusted companion all the way through seminary and all the way through these semesters of mentoring. And they, again, you get to choose who this mentor is, but you're encouraged to choose somebody with certain characteristics. And along the lines that you talked about, are they willing to speak into your life? Are they willing to look at your life through a spiritual lens? These types of things. And so that's your balcony mentor. But each semester, you have to develop a learning plan, your own personal goals that you want to grow in. And you do this in consultation with your mentor and with the Holy Spirit and in prayer and all of those things. But you develop your learning plan and you work that plan all throughout the semester. Your plan may call for skills that your balcony mentor does not have. Or is not necessarily an expert in. And so you work with your balcony mentor to find for that semester a floor mentor, somebody who can just come in for that semester and really mentor and guide and train you in that particular area, whether it be a skill that you're trying to acquire professionally or a character trait you're trying to grow in. If your mentor it's like, I'm not an expert there. Why don't you try to find somebody who fits this mold? Then great. You bring in and you still meet with your balcony mentor, but you also meet with your floor mentor to really grow in that particular area. And again, your balcony mentor is overseeing that whole process. And I find that to be a really healthy approach to mentoring.
This blows my mind, and I think answers the question you were asking. Imagine for a moment a church in which the staff members, and not exclusively the staff members, but the staff members and anybody that was appropriate was seen as a balcony mentor. And everybody in the church is meeting 4 to 6 times a year with one of those people. But they are helping you identify in that conversation what is the thing you want to be working at in this season of your life? And who can I connect you with in the church that is awesome at that? And then that person actually picks up the mentoring, not forever, but for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 12 weeks, genuinely short term, and really. And this is fascinating. One of the things I'm really intrigued by in the coaching training that I've received, the best life change happens in short-term bursts.
Hmm. That's
They
interesting.
This particular company, and they had over 24,000 coaching sessions in this company last month.
Last
Every
month.
single one last month. 1 month, 24,000 sessions, all of which are measured on a set of scales, things like a depression scale, an anxiety scale. They consistently benchmark 50 to 70% improvement in people's experience of the symptoms of those kind of challenges in 4 to 6 weeks.
Hmm.
People are up for doing a burst of work. And so I think if we harnessed that by setting people up with floor mentors 3 or 4 times a year, 2 or 3 times a year, and the continuity was given by some kind of balcony mentors who were watching the way this was kind of integrating into a larger life for you, I think that would be a fascinating way to systematize a church. If you build a church around this one thing, what would happen?
Well, and this gets back to something you said at the beginning of the episode. You talked about how discipleship programs are focused on either do the right things or think the right things. And this idea of theological integration you saw as more holistic, to borrow the exact term, more integrated into one's life beyond just doing the right things or thinking the right things. And so I think what you're talking about here with this balcony and floor mentor model is the opportunity to learn how to do the right thing or think the right thing in a short 4 to 6 week burst. But then you and the balcony mentor do the hard work of integrating that knowledge and solidifying it into a way of life from that point forward.
Absolutely. It allows for, I think, it takes into consideration some of the benefits of the short term and some of the benefits of the long term. It also integrates this sort of idea of thinking and doing together, and helps you be one whole. It also, I mean, think about how fast you could get somebody into mentoring if they understand themselves to be a floor mentor. You take somebody through whatever your new believer material is, the minute they're done with it, they're a floor mentor for somebody else to go through that material. It's
Sure.
6, 7 weeks. It doesn't, you're not saying, nobody's pretending that they can mentor you for the rest of your life. It's just, hey, you just finished. All right, here's the book. Go take it that person through. One of the balcony mentors is looking for a person. You're up.
Yeah. I mean, I think you could get a lot of floor mentors. I do think you're going to really need, though, you're going to need a significant number of balcony mentors as well. I don't know that this could fall just on, say, paid staff. I think it's going to, I don't know. I think the selection criteria for the balcony members would have to be very nuanced because you're going to you're going to need somebody with a lot of wisdom, a lot of patience, a lot of good, high relational skills. I don't know. You're going to need a lot of intangibles out of those balcony mentors.
Yes, I think you're exactly right. I would add courage to that list. Um,
Yeah.
and I think you're exactly right. And this is, I think, one of the biggest challenges. My wife and I slowly working our way through the Mars Hill podcast.
Yeah.
We had a conversation about it, I don't know, 2 years ago, and my wife and I are still plugging along. I mean, in our defense, an episode can be 2.5 hours long, so that's a lot. Some of our listeners think our episodes are long, but 2.5 hours, that's a lot of episode. But anyway, one of the conversations that we were having is that when we are looking at leaders in the church who should no longer be leaders, we are waiting for them to do something objectively wrong. You were mean to somebody feels too subjective of a criterion for us.
Hmm.
Your being prideful feels too subjective to us. We're waiting for the moment where you clearly embezzled money. You clearly broke this rule that a camera could have caught, whatever. And I think what you're hitting on is that we couldn't have standards that were that objective in that sense of if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
They would have to be character standards, much like, frankly, the ones that Paul has lists in Timothy and Titus, that you know them when you see them, but that doesn't mean everybody has to necessarily, it doesn't mean there has to be evidence that can be brought into a court of law, which is almost what it feels like we're looking for.
Right. Which it's so funny that you bring it into this context, because when we talk about a balcony mentor, I assume from the outset that every single listener it would shy away from a balcony mentor who was rude or mean or prideful. I just think every one of them would, if they knew that, candidate X was rude, mean, and prideful, and then heard that the church selected them to be a mentor, they'd be like, what is this church thinking? And yet, when we talk about pastors, what we experienced in Mars Hill, and they're rude and mean and prideful, we're like, oh yeah, but they're a great speaker, or they're such they have such a knowledge of the Bible, or look at how gifted of a leader they are. We gloss over it with something else that we're attracted to, and we just forget all about it. It's just amazing to me.
And this is the flip side of why I think, not that you have to limit it to staff members in a legalistic sense, but to say that staff members can't do it is deeply concerning to me.
Oh gosh, no. I was not saying staff members can't.
I mean, can't do all of it. The minute you say that, what you're saying is a church can potentially be so big that the staff doesn't have time in their schedules to meet with somebody 4 to 6 times a year.
Well, so that's where I don't think 4 to 6 times a year for a balcony mentor is enough. I think at a minimum, you need to meet with your balcony mentor once a month. I think this is a deep relationship that needs to form between a mentee and a balcony mentor. They need to track with their mentee consistently and know how their life and their integration process is going. And I don't think you can do that less than once a month.
I wonder about that. But even if we took once a month, I suspect church staff members, this would take a radical reorientation of the church on what staff members were using their time for. It would be a very different style of church. I don't know that it could grow to 1,000 people, but I still want there to be enough time in the staff's schedule to be able to do this.
Yeah.
I just do. I am going to advocate for a people-centric staff to the cost of a significantly large number of other things.
Yeah. I agree with you. Yeah.
Think
I
about what
agree.
the alternative is. Then if the staff somehow isn't doing this, there are people who don't know if the pastors are prideful or mean-spirited because they don't have any personal relationship with those people.
Hmm,
And that can't be good.
for sure. Well, and it can't be good. I mean, let's just take it to the into a different context. I don't know how you preach to a congregation that you do not know. And so if the pastors are that disconnected, and say especially the senior or the teaching pastor is that disconnected, how do you craft sermons that are in any way relevant to your people?
Yeah. And so I guess for me, a big chunk of it is wanting to not assume they can't, because I fear for the church if they aren't the primary ones. And again, I don't mean there are plenty of people you could add in who would be almost, in my mind, in this sense, lay staff members, right? Like at my church right now, there are retired missionaries and there are folks who, I mean, I may have been a pastor for 20 years, but they were missionaries in several different countries for that long. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
like it's not a question of, well, they're not a staff member, whatever. It's clearly, yes, let's do that. Like,
yeah, yeah.
um, but I don't know. I'm not articulating the concern I have very well. I don't feel.
I totally hear your concern, and I like your thought because I would rather live in a world in which the pastoral staff had the time to be balcony members for every single member of that church. I like that world better than the one I live in. And so I'd like to strive that direction. And if in the meantime, we fall back on highly qualified people who are not on paid staff, okay, that's great.
And maybe that's what we mean by forget paid or not paid. Maybe this is what we mean by pastor or elder, is somebody who is qualified to do this job.
That's good. Well, this has been a great conversation about theological integration. And I think when we think about it in those terms, it really pushes us to think beyond our traditional buckets of discipleship. And I love how you've drawn back this idea of mentoring. I think it's the only way I can conceive of to really integrate this growth and this new knowledge and this. Yeah, I just think that's the right approach. But I'm highly curious from our audience's perspective. What discipleship programs have you all been a part of? Have you found any that have really hit the mark for what we would call theological integration? And if so, what made that a success? Or if you've been a part of a mentoring program that you found really helpful, we'd love to hear about that as well. So you can find us on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, on Threads. You can also write to us at onthephonewithjosh@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you and hear about your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I am sure that there are a host of different ways people have found that their churches helped them with this experience. And really, I would love to even hear from people. What has it looked like to feel like, yes, I am more theologically integrating my life? Like, what does that actually look like? How do you know that's actually what's happening? Um, I think that would be a great conversation to invite somebody to have listen to this podcast and then go have a conversation about that with somebody. That would be
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah. Or, gosh, take this episode, send it to somebody and say, would you be my balcony mentor?
Ooh.
Could you walk through life with me for a bit? I would really value your company as we go. Like, that would be awesome.
That's good. That is so good. Man, I would love to hear some stories about that and hear what comes of those kind of conversations. But In the meantime, Josh, I'm curious what else you've been thinking about.
Yeah, well, so my thought is actually a really simple one this week, and it's not necessarily a balcony mentor, but it is somebody very akin to one. I recently reconnected with my spiritual director on Friday. We normally end our sessions by scheduling the next session. And a couple of months ago, we couldn't do that at the end of our session. And so we just decided, oh, well, we'll schedule later. And then later never came. So I went a couple of months without seeing my spiritual director, and then re-engaged last week and got to meet with him. Man, oh man, I should not break off that habit. That is so good. And good in a different way, right? It's not a balcony mentor. It's not somebody who is necessarily, though this can happen, not necessarily there to speak directly into your life, but is there to open up space for you to engage with God and hear how God would like to respond to what's going on in your life and guide you forward. And I just love that about my spiritual director. There are times I feel like I want more direction out of spiritual direction. But he is so good at just saying, nope, this is your time with God. So how can we open up space for you and God to interact better? And I tell you what, I always meet God in a new, fresh way through spiritual direction. And I really, really appreciate it. So that's just my plug for spiritual direction as another way of growth.
It's amazing. I love that. I love that. I think that's incredible. I have recently started seeing a spiritual director and have found it to be incredible. It's very challenging and very inspiring.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you? What are you thinking about?
This is a really simple thought as well. I was reading Mark 15 this morning, which is the crucifixion story, and I just was deeply struck by the space in which Jesus is dead. Whether it is Joseph of Arimathea having to handle the dead body, or Jesus' closest followers somehow, I guess I often forget that the day Jesus was dead was Sabbath. So they're having to do their lifelong ingrained Sabbath habits in this moment of profound emptiness and loss. And I don't know, there's something there that is profound about knowing Jesus is in a tomb, knowing that today is the Sabbath, having touched the body. It's just very heavy. And that's what I've been thinking about.
Yeah. It is such a earthy thing. Mm-hmm. We often think about the way that Jesus embodies his deity, but this is a fully human experience to die and have your body cared for by others and lovingly buried and mourned over. That is all so human.
Yeah, deeply so, right?
Yeah.
Well, hey, you ready to have another really good conversation next week?
Yes, please. Let's do that.
All right. I'll talk to you then.
Okay. Bye-bye.